Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Arianna Vitali, and I'm Secretary General at the Coalition for Energy Savings. I'm delighted that you are able to join us for this online event entitled Tackling Rising Energy Prices, the Untapped Potential of the Energy Efficiency Directive. For those of you who do not know the Coalition, we are the voice of energy efficiency and savings in Europe. The Coalition brings together a unique, diversified membership encompassing businesses, local authorities, energy agencies, energy communities, and civil society organizations. This afternoon, I'm joined by distinguished guests to discuss how energy savings and energy efficiency, particularly with the recast of the Energy Efficiency Directive, offer the opportunity to provide a structural, long-term solution to the recurring energy price spikes that are having negative impacts on citizens and businesses. When trying to devise solutions to alleviate the negative effects of high energy prices, there is unfortunately the tendency to approach the problem by focusing on supply-side measures only. We hear a lot, for example, about the creation of strategic stocks or joint procurement of natural gas. There is a quote that I love that is attributed to Albert Einstein, which says, "We can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them." I think this applies perfectly to the situation we are facing. The EU and its member states are trying to solve the spike in energy prices driven by increased global energy demand by focusing mainly on supply-side measures, instead of urgently prioritizing reduction of energy use. This approach perpetuates the problem, does not provide a definitive solution to high energy bills for citizens and industry, does very little to reduce energy poverty, and may well put at risk the achievement of climate goals. What can really make a difference in the medium to long term is to adopt an ambitious legislative energy efficiency framework coupled with financial and technical support that aims at drastically reducing energy use. This will provide a systemic and structural answer to high energy costs for consumers. As the Coalition for Energy Saving, we are convinced that the revision of the Energy Efficiency Directive can provide this framework by helping the EU to save energy, become less dependent on energy imports, and more resilient to energy price volatility, while also contributing to curb greenhouse gas emissions and improve environmental protection. I'm sure you are now eager to hear more from our keynote speaker and panelists and listen to their input to this debate. But before that, please let me go through some housekeeping rules. You are in listen-only mode, but we would like this event to be as interactive as possible. You will be able to ask questions to the speakers by typing them directly in the question and answer box. I will do all my best to redirect all of them to the relevant speaker in the second part of our conference. Also, for your information, this event will be recorded. So without any further ado, let me introduce you our first guest of this afternoon, Mr. Niels Fuglsang. Niels is a Danish MEP from the Socialists and Democrats. He is member of the Industry, Research and Energy Committee of the European Parliament, and he was appointed as the rapporteur for the recast of the Energy Efficiency Directive. Thank you again for being with us this afternoon, and Mr. Fuglsang, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ariane, and thank you for the invitation to this important event. I think we have a vital work ahead of us, so I'm happy that so many people have joined and will participate in the discussions, because it is now that we have the opportunity to make a real difference when it comes to our energy policy. And it's also now that it's very necessary that we do it. When we read the reports from the UN's climate panel, it's obvious that we don't have many years. We have to act now. We have to act actually in this mandate. I was elected 2.5 years ago for the European Parliament, and my opinion is, but that's not only my opinion, I think it's pretty obvious when you read the UN Climate Panel's report, that if we don't do anything this mandate, if we postpone the action, if we say to each other, okay, we didn't get an agreement that was ambitious, like all the previous attempts, we failed. If this is the case this time, then we will be too late to reach the Paris Agreement. So a lot of weight is on the shoulders of the politicians who are currently holding office, because they cannot postpone the ambitious action any longer. Now is the time to act. I would like to tell you that I was at the COP26 in Glasgow this year. There was a good vibe. Many green, innovative businesses, NGOs, climate activists. I'm sure many of you were there, and there were lots of hope. But who were also there was the fossil industry, the oil industry, the gas industry, the coal industry. They were all there, and according to one counting, they were actually more than 500 participants from the fossil fuels industry, more than from any single country. Russia was also there. They have an ambition to become climate neutral at the latest in 2060. That's 10 years too late, according to the UN Climate Panel. China was there. They have an ambitious ambition of becoming carbon neutral by 2060. Again, 10 years too late. India was there. Their ambition is 2070, 20 years too late, according to the Climate Panel. There were many positive things at the COP26, but the overall impression that I got was that too many major economies have too few ambitions and too little policy that we need to reach the Paris Agreement and to keep global warming at maximum 1.5 degrees Celsius. And the one thing that I took away from this meeting was that the EU really is the only leader right now with our Fit for 55 package. We're not doing enough because nobody is doing enough, but we have a chance of being a leader and also having the job of pushing these other countries, these other economies in the right direction the coming year. And for us to do that, I think we need some ambitious legislation of our own. That's why I'm happy to speak to you today. I think we are seeing two crises at the same time here in the European Union and in the world as such. One is the energy crisis. This year, we've seen a spike in energy prices. We've seen a energy supply crisis, and especially the gas prices, the prices on natural gas have gone through the roof. That has serious consequences for millions of Europeans that are struggling to pay their energy bills. In 2019, 34 million households were struggling to keep their houses warm. This winter, that number will undoubtedly be higher. The other crisis that we're seeing at the same time is the climate crisis. That's the biggest crisis of our civilization, as far as I'm concerned. And we are already seeing the consequences today: heat waves, sea rises, floods, and forest fires. The consequences are real, they are there. We've seen average temperatures for the last 5 years and the last 10 years to be the highest on record. 2019 was the second highest year when it comes to the average temperature that we've ever seen. So unless we act rapidly, this will only be worse and it will be a catastrophe. We have to avoid that. So we're seeing two crises at the same time: the energy crisis and the climate crisis. I think we need to solve them both. Sadly, there are voices in the policy debate that try to play out these crises against each other. These voices wrongfully say that the energy crisis is caused by too much green transition, and that we have not invested sufficiently in the fossil industry, and that the ETS price, the price on CO2 allowances, is too high. That is voices in the European Parliament, also among some member states. But importantly, the European Commission and the majority in the European Parliament has taken the opposite stand. We believe that this crisis, this energy crisis, is not caused by too much green transition, but by too little. We know that renewable energy, wind energy, solar energy is cheaper, is more profitable than fossil energy today. And we know that this energy crisis is caused by primarily spiking gas prices, that is spiking prices on fossil energy. We need more green transition to fight the energy crisis. That's why we have two crises, but we have one solution, which is to increase the renewable energy and to increase the energy efficiency. I myself, I am rapporteur on the Energy Efficiency Directive, and I think energy efficiency is obviously of enormous importance when it comes to tackling both these crises. We know that from the International Energy Agency, and I know that they are present here today, so I look forward to the discussion, but according to them, energy efficiency should contribute with 44% of the necessary CO2 reductions globally in order to reach the Paris Agreement. We also know that if we increase energy efficiency and save energy, we will have a chance of actually reducing the energy bills of households who are struggling. Actually, every time we increase the energy efficiency by 1%, gas imports decline by 2.6%. That's according to the European Commission. So we have all good reasons to make an ambitious deal on the Energy Efficiency Directive. For me, I would mention three priorities here today when it comes to the directive. First of all, I think we need to look at how we can increase the ambition level when it comes to the targets. There are different targets in the EED, in the Energy Efficiency Directive. We of course have the overall target of reducing the energy consumption by 9% in 2030 compared to the 2020 baseline. Can we increase that? We also need to look at the energy savings obligations. 1.5% energy savings obligations for member states every year. We need to look at whether that's ambitious enough. I think that we have the climate law in the European Union saying that we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 55%, but it says at least 55%. And we actually know that in order to reach the Paris Agreement, we should do more than 55%. According to the European Parliament, the target should have been 60%. That was our ambition level. And so I think we need to pay attention to the at least. And if we can make legislation more ambitious so we can actually go beyond the 55%, I think that would be incredibly important. So the targets for the energy savings obligation, the overall target, the targets for the public sector, can they be increased? Can they be increased in a responsible way? Well, let's look into that. And that I would also like to discuss with you today. The second thing I would like to mention is that we need member states to deliver also on the short term. We have targets for 2030, and that's good. But how can we make sure that member states don't wait until the end of the decade with the action? We need action right now. Fortunately, we have some instruments like the energy savings obligations that member states need to deliver every year. But the question is if we could make some milestones on the overall target in order to make sure that the action happens rather today than tomorrow. So that would be my second point of discussion that I would like to hear your opinion on. Third, I think we also need to talk about energy poverty. And fortunately, the European Commission has addressed this question in the new proposal. There are different provisions making sure that, or proposing that member states need to focus on the vulnerable consumers and the energy poor consumers to make sure that the energy savings are directed, a share of the energy savings are directed at the vulnerable consumers. We need to look at who are these vulnerable consumers? How should we define them? Is the definition good enough? We need to make sure that we hit the right people, or aim for the right people when it comes to our help to these people. Also, we need to look at, I think, how can member states mobilize funding so we don't end up in a situation where the poor people, the energy poor people, the vulnerable consumers have their buildings renovated, their houses renovated, but the result is increases in rent, so that these vulnerable people will have difficulties paying their rent. That is certainly not the goal of this effort, and we need to make sure that that will not be the result either of the effort. I think that the vulnerable consumers and energy poverty is incredibly important, both for ethical reasons. I mean, 34 million households that are struggling to pay their energy bills. That's a catastrophe. But also, if we are to succeed in this green transformation, we need to make sure that we have everybody along and everybody supporting this effort. And therefore, we need to make sure that people can actually afford what they're being asked to pay. There are many other areas in the Energy Efficiency Directive. It's a huge effort that we stand before, and so I invite you to participate with solutions on all of the areas. These three priorities is what I would mention today, and then I basically look forward to the discussion with you. Now is the time. This is our chance. If we are to reach the Paris Agreement, we have to act now and not in 5 years. So let's do it together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Niels, for this very inspiring and motivating keynote address. I think most of the participants and stakeholders around the table would agree that energy efficiency could contribute really with the fast action to reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and therefore contribute to the achievement of the Paris Agreement in this decade as soon as possible, as you just mentioned. Before I think we go to open the discussion to the panel, I would like though to ask you maybe a follow-up question on your keynote address. You mentioned several times member states and the role that they will be having in implementing the Energy Efficiency Directive, and also to ensure that energy cut will happen already in this decade. So as we are speaking today, energy ministers are actually discussing at the Energy Council and exchanging views on the Energy Efficiency Directive. So very important from us to follow and know the results of this discussion. But I would like to hear from your perspective, how do you see the negotiation with Council going? What do you expect? Do you expect major hurdles? We have seen in the past that European Parliament and the Council had on certain points very different views. And we have seen as well article in the press talking about the EED progress report. So I was wondering from your side, what's your perception of the upcoming negotiation with the Council? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ariana. I think that it is our role in the European Parliament to be as ambitious as we can. I hope I stressed that in my speech, for many reasons, because we need it, but also looking at how the Council and the Parliament negotiates, have a fear that the Council, in some instances, will try to water down the directive. I don't hope they will, and I hope that we can put our national differences and national interests to some extent aside. We can never do that completely, but to some extent, and look at the grand picture. But I think that member states, as far as I can hear, of course, they are discussing their targets. I mean, we have this overall target, which is binding on the 9% energy consumption reduction. But who will do what? So that will, of course, be important to the member states. How big a share should the rich countries do? How big a share should the more vulnerable countries do? And how should we calculate this? I think that will be a challenge for the Council. From my point of view, it's more important what the EU does altogether. But of course, we have to, I think, hold countries accountable. We cannot only have EU targets saying that the EU should do this or that if no country is accountable to, how much should I do? Then every country can point at the other country and say, oh, but you should have done more. And I think that that's something we need to avoid, that situation. So I think the European Parliament should really be strict on having some different national responsibilities that the countries cannot say that other countries should do. That will be one of the challenges, I think. Then I think that when it comes to the public sector, I'm sure that some finance ministries will, in different countries, will have reservations when it comes to the goal on 1.7% on reductions in the public energy reductions in the public sector, and the 3% renovation target for the public sector. That, of course, costs money for the state to implement these targets. And I think maybe some member states will ask for more flexible approaches, that they can reach these targets by doing something else, that they will have alternatives. I think that it's important to, of course, not decide everything on the European Union level, because there are different solutions in different member states, but also at the same time to find a balance where we do insist on some measures. Because, for example, when it comes to renovation of buildings, we know that this is very effective way of reaching a higher level of energy efficiency. And so there are some instruments that I think we should insist on, that there needs to be an effort on these instruments. So, I think that member states will probably try, some of them, to go for a more flexible approach, you could say. And the European Parliament should probably try to stick to saying, there are some things that we know work. These things member states need to do. And you cannot, as a member state, just say that, but it's only an EU target, so it's not me, but it's someone else who should do it. I think that will be some of my main priorities.
Thank you very much for that response. I think we will discuss most of the specific together with the panel. So I think let me ask to the other panelists to turn on their camera, and we can keep the discussion going. Also, I hope you can react to the introductory speech of Niels Fuglsang. For the audience, you will be able to ask questions directly to the all panelists towards the end of this event. But before I start with a question to the panelists, let me introduce the additional 4 speakers that we have this afternoon. First of all, I would like to welcome Vida Rosite, Energy Policy Analyst at the Energy Efficiency Divisions in the International Energy Agency. Welcome. Then Louise Sunderland, Senior Advisor at the Regulatory Assistance Project from RAP. Dimitri Vergne, Team Leader Sustainability and Acting Team Leader Energy at the European Consumer Organization, BEUC. And finally, Valérie Planmaison, Secretary General at the European Federation of Intelligent Energy Efficiency Services. Welcome, everybody, and thanks again for joining us. So the plan is that in the next hour, we will have a discussion also reacting on the many good input we just heard from Niels. But before I start with more specific questions, I would like just to kick off the discussion with a question to you that really relates to the topic of today's event. And I would like to hear your perspective on how energy efficiency can contribute to mitigating high energy costs for consumers, or as Niels just put it, how energy efficiency can contribute to solve the energy crisis. So thank you very much for your input on that, and I'll turn first to Vida. The floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Arianna, and thank you, Niels, for the introduction. Just starting off, just to reinforce what Niels was saying earlier, IEA analysis shows that the extreme rise in energy prices across Europe is the result of higher energy demand across the world, combined with tighter than expected supply of gas, and combined with weather events that have impacted on both supply and demand. And as Niels was saying, now is the time to act and ramp up deployment of renewables and energy efficiency implementation. Of course, energy efficiency can contribute to mitigating high consumer bills. Implementation is also associated with a wide range of multiple benefits, such as job creation, improved comfort levels, enhanced productivity, all of which are extremely important for our economy, and especially now. The technologies and products that we need to improve energy efficiency, they already exist and they're readily available on the market. Furthermore, energy efficiency provides long-term impact, meaning that investing in energy efficiency now will help insulate from further price shocks and will help reduce reliance on imported fossil fuels and contribute to energy security. And I'd also like to emphasize, as Niels was saying, the role of energy efficiency in enabling clean energy transitions. As our recent analysis indicates, early action on energy efficiency is absolutely fundamental to have even a chance of reaching net zero targets, and will help bring down the cost of implementing other clean energy technologies. And just as a final point, a few additional considerations, because how energy prices are designed will have an impact on the extent to which energy efficiency will lower consumer bills. So there's a need for systematic action across policy domains and instruments to further encourage and enable energy efficiency. And as a final point, an important aspect to consider, which also was touched upon by Niels, is to consider people in all clean energy policy design. And the Global Commission on People-Centered Clean Energy Transitions recently released 12 recommendations aimed at ensuring fairness, equity, and engagement of people, as well as the creation of decent jobs and worker protection as we move forward with our transition. So thank you very much for the opportunity to intervene.
Thank you so very much, Vida, for this useful remark, and again to put this in context from your perspective. On the same question, I will turn now to Louise. That I'm sure she will have also a lot to add in relation to the energy poverty angle.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, as you say, Arianna, just adding, I think particularly from the energy poverty perspective, we are moving into quite a cold winter already. I hear it's been snowing in Brussels today. So we are within this energy crisis, we are moving into a winter on the backdrop of which was already increasing energy poverty crisis across Europe. So, I think the energy crisis really does focus our minds and our attentions on this more structural issue of energy poverty. And as Niels says, we know now there's been plenty of assessments that come out that have concluded that to address this energy crisis, we actually need more green transition. So we need, more energy efficiency, more res deployment across the whole economy. But very importantly, we need that to be targeted as well, in a way that I just don't think we've really done at a European level to the extent that we need to do it for the Fit for 55 package. And by targeting, of course, I mean targeting our energy efficiency measures on those people who are suffering energy poverty and who are now further impacted most by these price shocks. And I do, of course, mean those citizens that are on low incomes and those citizens, most importantly as well, that are living in the worst performing homes. And we do know that, unfortunately, disproportionately, the low income households tend to live more in the worst performing homes. And this is where we get this crisis of energy poverty coming together, the nexus between very expensive to run homes and low incomes. So I think the good news is, of course, that we do also recognise, and the Commission has recognised this, which is very welcome, that energy efficiency is the most long-term sustainable solution to energy poverty. We have the answer, and this is great. The short-term measures that a lot of member states are rolling out, bill support, support for households to pay their bills over the winter are very important, but they shouldn't be at the expense of the longer term, more sustainable, actually more cost-effective solution of energy efficiency measures rolled out in the short to medium term. They are the long-term solution, but they need to be rolled out really as urgently as some of the price support, the bill support measures. And I guess what I would say to end with is that we shouldn't really underestimate the degree of the turnaround that this targeting means. We have to date really looked for the cost-effective energy efficiency opportunities across the whole economy, particularly in the building sector. We've seen a lot of incentive programs for renovation, but they require households to contribute their own funds. And we know, therefore, that low-income households have not been able to access that support, access those incentives. So I don't think we can underestimate the kind of turnaround we're talking about. We are talking about 180-degree turnaround in the way that we design some of these programs. And of course, Niels has already mentioned that the Energy Efficiency Directive, very welcome in starting to do this in a very sort of practical, fundamental, robust way through the ring fence of the energy savings obligation. I think we could carry on talking for a long time about whether that's enough and what our ambitions are, and therefore, whether those ring fences are going to be sufficient. But I think it's a definite step in the right direction. The Energy Efficiency Directive can't do it all. We need to look across actually the whole package for this big shift in targeting of our support. The Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, absolutely. We're expecting this proposal to come out within the next couple of weeks. And at an absolute minimum, I think we need to see a robust framework of minimum energy performance standards in there. The point of these minimum energy performance standards is they target the renovations at the worst performing buildings first, and that they set out the full trajectory for full decarbonisation for those buildings. This is absolutely essential, that we can then coordinate the funding, the finance, all of the other support around that clear destination for those homes, as I say, targeted on the worst performing buildings first. And I think that's absolutely key.
Thank you, Louise. I think you touched upon many different points, from latest one, what the EPBD can do, to previous one, the energy savings obligation, and how that can be targeted best to vulnerable consumers. I think we can come back to these points later, but before I would finish with the round to the all speakers, and I'll ask Dimitri to take the floor. Thanks.
Thank you, Arianna, and thanks for having us on the panel today. Well, I would echo very much what Louise and Niels just said about the green transition being the right answer and not the cause for the energy spikes that we're seeing at the moment in Europe, and the need for a conjunction of both short-term protection measures, the Commission's toolbox, and with very specific measures targeted at low-income consumers and making sure that there's no harm in the upcoming months, and the need for a long-term transition with energy efficiency and the uptake of renewables. Regarding energy efficiency, as the saying goes, this is a no-brainer because the cheapest energy is the energy that we do not consume. So this is what should guide us in this discussion. The question now is, how do we get there? How practically do we achieve this change, and do we achieve the high energy efficiency gains that we need to achieve? At BEUC, with our members across Europe, consumer groups at national level, we have been focusing a lot on energy poverty the past few years. For instance, we have this Horizon 2020 funded project called STEP, which is looking at concrete low-cost solutions to energy poverty, sealing your window, low cost insulation of your attics, things like this, which can help lower income consumers, especially, manage their energy bill. But obviously, there is only so much that you can achieve with these quick wins, so to say, and this is much more of a structural problem, which needs structural solutions. And I would echo very much what you said in the introduction, Ariana, that we need new solutions, like the supply side measures are not enough. And I guess that the Energy Efficiency Directive that Niels, you will be working on in the upcoming months is a perfect example of how we move from this high-level climate debate, which is a bit far away from citizens, to concrete action, which actually changes the life of people on the ground, and for this, I would maybe just highlight a few priorities, and I guess we'll have time to discuss them more at length during the debate. But for us, the Energy Efficiency Directive should indeed target energy poor consumers. So very much agree with Niels here. Accelerate the renovation rates of buildings through concrete and enabling measures, and we'll be happy to pick up on a few of them maybe later during the debate. And last thing, integrate stronger consumer rights and protection, notably on new markets, for instance, district heating, which is expected to take off in the upcoming years. And so, again, stressing that this EED, and the Fit for 55 package is this translation of the climate target into this concrete action, which delivers on the ground. And I think that's the most important about the discussion that we're about to have. Thank you, Ariana.
Thank you, Dimitri. Thank you so much. And I think that from your side, there is a lot, again, similarity to what previous speaker has said, clearly pointing to the need to empower consumers and to protect consumers. I think there is as well the other stakeholders that have been affected by the energy crisis. Also, the price spike and are also affecting industry. So I would like maybe to hear a bit, Valérie, from her perspective on that debate, and if you could say to us a few words on that point. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So I'm a bit more on the side of the industry of energy efficiency services. Which doesn't mean at all that I disagree with anybody of you, because it's just adding a few things to what was said, because we are all aligned on the fact that energy efficiency reduces demand, reduces pressure on prices, reduces energy bills, and facilitates energy transition by reducing the demand. Having said that, and agreeing with everything that was said, the question is how to do it. So first, we, as the industry, very much favor market signals. So energy efficiency targets, which are compulsory for member states, that is what we call a market signal, because it will happen. Also for vulnerable consumers, I mean that encompasses that all. Second, those mandatory targets have to be of the same nature of the targets for renewable transition. Otherwise, you just go for transition and you don't take the energy efficiency measures, because you are not supposed to have them going hand in hand. If they are at the same level of bindingness, that is consistent. It was said a few minutes ago that it's a long-term action, energy efficiency. We have no solutions for this afternoon, but we have to plan for long-term actions. That's what the long-term renovation strategies, for instance, in the Energy Performance Directive of buildings plans for. There is also planning tools in the Energy Efficiency Directive for heating and cooling needs, which are also crucial. And deriving from that, there are long-term actions to be developed. So from our side, we clearly advocate for energy management solutions, which have to accompany actions to renovate the buildings, to renovate them or to stage renovate them, not necessarily on one go. Making the energy management steady, accompanying the renovation measures ensures you to keep the performance over time. So one of the key tools for that could be are energy performance contracts, which are well acknowledged and even better in the directive, also with what is called for public buildings, assessments of feasibility. You have to ask yourself whether you can have an energy performance contract, which guarantees savings. And that's particularly crucial for vulnerable consumers if they are in such approach. It's complex approach, so they need to be they need to be part of a plan. It's not an individual measure to be taken for individual households. So it's collective solutions, or what would we advocate for. A last point, very important for vulnerable consumers, is that the plans and the measures have to be at district level, not only isolated buildings level. District level are either district heating solutions or other district solutions. And this is really crucial that they remain covered by the energy efficiency obligation schemes, those district solutions, that they are not forgotten and that they are not excluded, because they are an essential part of those solutions for the consumers. For social housing covered by a district heating is a crucial mean, together with energy services.
Thank you so much, Valerie. I think we had a very interesting first round of thoughts that will give us food for discussions later on, but I will still ask you to wait for a second before going into the details of the Energy Efficiency Directive. And I would like to ask before that a question to Vida that is probably more general and that can help us further framing the discussion. So the IEA published recently this report on the 2021 energy efficiency report and the World Energy Outlook. I think I would like to hear from you what are the key findings regarding energy efficiency improvement that can be relevant for the EU and for the discussions that we are having.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to intervene. So both these reports are very much focusing on the net zero scenario that the IEA released earlier this year. And there we have over 40 milestones pertaining to energy efficiency. And it's really important to note that energy efficiency is front-loaded. So as Valerie was saying, energy efficiency requires long-term action. I fully agree, but there's also a growing sense of urgency that we do need to ramp up on implementation. And early action on energy efficiency, as I said before, it's crucial to achieving net zero faster, smoother, and at lower cost. And a recent market report doesn't paint a hugely positive picture in terms of where we are at today in energy efficiency across the world, but also in Europe. So we're showing that there is some increase in energy efficiency implementation, but it's increasing at a very slow rate. And we would need to fit into that net zero scenario, we would need to increase energy intensity, so decrease energy intensity by more than 4% per year between now and 2030. And so that's more than the double of what we've achieved over previous decades. So it's a massive ramp up. On a positive note, we are seeing some trends that could be helpful in enabling us to accelerate progress. So we're seeing an increased deployment of digital technologies that can be utilized, as Valerie was talking about, energy management systems and energy service companies that can make energy efficiency more tangible, seen as more reliable, and can help counteract the risks that have been perceived to be significant in terms of the uptake. And we're also seeing that there's an increased interest in energy-related early-stage venture capital. So we're seeing startups that are focusing on digitalization as a way to helping deliver energy efficiency and demand-side measures. And also, lastly, and a very interesting trend, we're also seeing that the large technology companies and even oil companies are starting to invest in digitally enabled energy efficiency business models. So there are trends and technologies and opportunities that could be leveraged to help us counteract these pervasive barriers that have left energy efficiency implementation on a very incremental level, because we have to move from incremental. We have to ramp up in order to be able to support clean energy transitions, as well as unlock all the other benefits that energy efficiency can provide that we've already been discussing in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very interesting, reminding us that the early action, that energy efficiency bring us solutions for the long term, but early action and immediate implementation is needed to ensure that we remain on track with the net zero goals, and at the same time provide good solution for consumers and industry. So I think after this first round, I would like to go back to Niels to see on one side whether he has any particular point he would like to react to what the other previous speakers have mentioned. Otherwise, I would also like to hear from you about the energy savings obligation. You already mentioned in your before that this is a crucial element of the directive, helping the EU to deliver with a specific and already well-existing solution on the overall energy efficiency target. So maybe you already mentioned the need to increase ambition, but maybe we'd like to hear more about also how this could be targeted, for example, to vulnerable consumers, whether you have any other idea on this point.
Yes, that's a very big question.
I was asking to Niels, Louise. First to Louise, to Niels, and then maybe you can add as well.
So sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you very much. No, just very interesting points from all of you. I think to listen, just been interesting to listen to you. For vulnerable consumers, well, I think you know, there are different ways we could approach this, but I think the provision in what is Article 8 on the energy savings obligation, that member states are obliged to make sure that a share of the energy savings that is proportionate to the number of vulnerable consumers are actually directed at the vulnerable consumers. That will be important, and I think that's a concrete measure that is not something that the member states should do if they like to or could do. That is something they have to do. I think in other parts of the directive we have provisions where member states can do something if they want to. I mean, they can make a fund which is directed at the vulnerable consumers. They should use their public funds in a way so that the vulnerable consumers will benefit. And I wonder if we should make that more binding, whether it would make sense to say that some of the formulations that are basically not mandatory, that are encouragement to member states, should be made more binding. And I'm thinking these days, these weeks, about how that could be done. So I would also very much like your input. The other thing I would say is that from a Danish perspective, heating and district heating systems have been incredibly important to us, and also a way that we have fought energy poverty. Back in the 1970s in Denmark, we had a huge crisis like most other European countries. We had an oil crisis, but we were extremely dependent on importing foreign oil. 90% of our energy back then came from imported oil. So we were hit very, very hard by the oil crisis. And we responded in different ways. But one of the things we did was that we rolled out district heating. We made massive investments in district heating. And then we went to coal. At that time, we didn't have any climate concerns. So we went to coal. And then we had these combined power and heat plants. So we made electricity, but then we used the surplus heat to warm up water and send into the district heating. And one of the things that we did was not very market-based. And I would also like to hear the panel's opinion on this, because the question is whether we should say, the thing we did back then was to say, okay, we roll out this district heating in all our cities, and then we basically force our consumers or our households to subscribe to this. We say you have to get your heat from the district heating system. There's no other way, because if we are to roll out this system, we basically need a lot of consumers, otherwise it doesn't make sense. So we need everybody, or almost everybody, to subscribe to it, to sign up to it. And I think that is that has been a key for the Danish district heating story, that we've had, I mean, almost all people in the cities get their heat from district heating because they had no choice, basically. So that is that's not so market-based. That is a state which is pretty strong, and maybe some would say that it's too strong, but it has been working pretty well for us also to make sure that we had more energy efficiency, because district heating combined with power and heating, creating power plants in combination, has been our way of reducing energy consumption and also fighting energy poverty. And I wonder, we have an article 24, encouraging member states to make plans for their heat system, and also to consider district heating systems. I wonder if we need to be a little bit more hardcore here to make sure that people actually sign up to these district heating systems. So I would like to hear your opinion on that also.
Does someone would like to reply directly to that question before we go back to the energy savings obligation? I see a lot of movement, first from Dimitri and then maybe from Valerie.
Well, on this point on district heating, very much agree with Niels that it's one of the most promising heating sources to be scaled up in Europe. And while I maybe not comment on the free market versus state planning aspect, what I will say is what is important for consumers to engage in this is first the clarity. So you mentioned indeed local heat plans. It's very important that it's clearly communicate to people what the plans are, so that you avoid, having a household investing in a new boiler, for instance, when 3-4 years from now, your neighborhood might be connected to a district heating network. And I think that was a point, like this thinking in terms of district that was raised also by Valerie. The second aspect I would also highlight as maybe a success of the Danish district heating strategy is that you need to protect consumers on these markets. And that's something that our Danish members said, one of the key success factors for Danish district heating sector is that you have a high level of consumer protection. And what we're asking for in the EED is a mirroring of the consumer rights and protection that currently exists in the Electricity Directive to the district heating sector. So with with protection against price volatility, clarity on the bills, etc. So if you combine both these things, good planning and strong consumer protection, I think you can really make district heating a success way beyond the Nordic countries.
Thanks, Dimitri. Valerie, would you like to come in before I go back then to the energy savings obligation part?
Just on this part, in most member states, there is no obligation for connection. And in any member state where there is an obligation for connection to district heating, like your country, Denmark, it's of course not an individual, in the other country, it's not an individual decision. It's not for one apartment, it's for the whole building. So it's always a collective solution. We fully agree with what Dimitri said. We're not pushing, for having connection obligation, because it has to be, it is accompanied by obligations. But to any extent. It's the most renewable solution and the most efficient solution. So that's the key thing. Then the other things, which is the protection of consumer, must be carefully studied to ensure that there is no abuse. But it's not a story of market, because in the end, there are other solutions in the countries where district heating are not under a connection obligation. All other solutions are in competition with district heating. So I wouldn't worry too much about the competition thing, because in most member states, it's not compulsory.
Thank you, Valérie.
And it develops.
Yeah, I think on that debate, I think what is really important, as mentioned by many of you, is the local planning, and that to ensure this is done with the planning, also to ensure that district heating is not looked at that in isolation, but in combination with the reduction of demand, for example, for the building stock, in which you could plan at the district level renovation of buildings, and then ensuring that the district heating can supply energy to those renovated buildings, and ideally renewable energy. So I think local planning in that respect play an important role, also to involve local authorities, citizens and consumers. But let me go back to Louise on the energy savings obligation. I think Niels in his first part of his reaction also mentioned the fact that the energy savings obligation article could be made a bit more binding in order to ensure that it really target the consumers that are most in need. And so I would like to hear from you, Louise, how this could be done, how this article can be improved to ensure that it targets the right vulnerable consumers.
Yeah, it was really great actually there to hear Niels looking for all the opportunities in the EED to, make more robust the actually already quite numerous mentions and contributions and encouragements to alleviate energy poverty that are within the draft. But I'm really pleased to hear Niels saying that he's looking for places to make that more robust. I think perhaps the most robust element we have at the moment is in the energy savings obligation, because at least the proposal as it stands right now does require member states to create a share of a ring fence of the savings that would be achievable within target households, low income, vulnerable, energy poor households, and I believe in those living in social housing as well. So it is already, if delivered this way, quite robust in that it's a firm requirement, which I think Niels is absolutely right, is where we need to be. We need to be beyond sort of gentle encouragement and into really firm requirements to make sure that actually this package does deliver on the overall aim of being just and inclusive and not leaving anyone behind. I don't think we can leave that to chance. So on the robustness and the fact it's mandatory, I think we're in the right place. Then the devil comes in the detail, doesn't it? I think looking at the calculation methodology proposed right into the detail of how the shares of the energy savings should be measured, should be identified, should be assessed by member states, and they will be assessed on a member state by member state level. I think that is an area we could look for improvement. The using the calculation methodology proposed, we see shares of the energy savings all the way down from a tiny 2.5% all the way up to sort of 22, 23%. So it's clear there's a huge variation in the ring fences created. Are they enough? I think certainly when you're looking at the lower end, 2.5% isn't really very significant. Obviously, despite the fact I do realise that's of a larger target, and therefore it's a small percentage of a larger pot, it still makes it a small percentage though. So I think there's work to be done there. I think we can look across to other countries that have already done this. So we know it's something that's doable, and certainly just looking at the energy company obligations, which are the largest tool used to deliver the energy savings obligation. I think there are 3 countries at least who deliver quite large ring fences. So I mean, the UK ring fences its entire energy company obligation to low income households, really in recognition of the need to address energy poverty in the UK. France has 25% of effort, and Ireland also has a ring fence, so a smaller ring fence. So it's doable. I think we could be more ambitious on the ring fences, particularly, as I say, if we define what our goal is with the Green Deal, the goal really must be, I think, not to just do no harm and create climate packages, climate policies that don't leave people worse off. But I think the aim really must be to address the structural inequities that have built up over decades. And if we're clear that that is our goal, then we need to look across the whole package, which is a much more difficult job, and actually look at where new burdens are created. And of course, there I am thinking about the potential new carbon pricing in the ETS2. Also, a requirement to renovate in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive will create a burden on some households that will need the support. The support might come through the Energy Efficiency Directive, it might come through financing and funding and other sources, but we need to make sure that the support is there, equal and actually over and above the burden. So we don't end up with a net zero, net do no harm result from this package, but actually we end up with a net positive result for individual households. And I think the Energy Efficiency Directive needs to be a real focus for where a lot of that support comes from. So as I say, I think it's a robust measure. It's a measure that's proven. It's been done in countries already, which is always very useful and very positive. And actually, I'm about to release a briefing on those countries that have done this, if people are interested. But I think we need to look at maybe being a bit more ambitious on those ring fences.
Thank you, Louise. I think that's clear. I don't know if anybody else would like to make a point on that. Otherwise, I would like to do maybe one follow-up question to Valérie. As you mentioned before, energy management services, and I would like to hear a bit from you how you think this can help reducing energy consumption and bring benefits, additional benefits for consumers and industry, maybe briefly, and then we can open up the discussion to questions from the public.
Yes, energy management helps maintain the energy performance over time. It's like bringing your new car, even new or old, at the garage every year. If you don't do it, you lose performance. If you don't do it, which is different from your car, you don't have the behavior of the consumers to under, let's say, control. I mean, you have to educate your consumers to well behave, and that's crucial to keep the performance, to maintain, to invest, and to keep the behavior of the consumers over time adequate, because people lose their good habits. And this is why the energy management is crucial. It's more important even than the energy audit, which is just a start. Then you take the measures, energy management, you decide on responsibilities, on who does what, and you decide to do it. And then there are instruments such as certain contracts, energy performance contracting, which guarantee over time contractually the performance, and which help pay some investments through the savings. Depending upon the investments, it can be paid totally. If it's renovation and if it's higher cost, it's not paid totally, but it helps. And this is why the energy management is crucial over time, and also is a tool to help develop the project.
Thanks. So I think here the point of financing comes into the play. I think, and maybe it's worth hearing your views on that point. We have a question from the public that is from James Collis. I don't know the organization because he didn't introduce himself. That looks about the relation between what will be the impact of high carbon prices on consumers, whether this would help and whether this will have a negative impact on more than vulnerable households. So what's the relation between high price of carbon on consumers and users? So that's an element that it's also related to financing. I don't know if someone would like to comment on that. Yes, Niels and then Dimitri, please.
Well, of course, high carbon prices, and we're talking about the ETS, I assume, will have an effect in the sense that on consumers, in the sense that it influences the energy prices. The energy prices, the spike in the energy prices is mainly caused by different factors, mainly caused by different factors, such as the gas demand. But of course, carbon prices can influence the energy prices. And also, if you expand the ETS, which is the plan to be covering transport and housing, that will have an influence. So I think it's very important to make sure that some of these measures that we take, okay, they will have an effect on consumers who will have to pay more, and vulnerable consumers will feel that very much. But then we have to take some countermeasures if we do that. We have to have a social climate fund which compensates vulnerable consumers. The member states have to think about how they tax, how they have an income tax, which is, I think, should be more progressive. So make sure that the people who earn the most also pay the most, and that we have a welfare system that helps the vulnerable consumers. So we have to think about, when we have the carbon price and the ETS, that we combine it with a progressive taxation that also compensates vulnerable consumers. And I think that will be a main challenge. That will perhaps be one of the biggest challenges to keep the social balance in the green transition, because we know that some of the things we have to do, they hit vulnerable consumers harder than rich consumers. So we will have to adjust the tax system and our welfare state in other parts to compensate for that, I think.
Thank you. Dimitri?
Yes, well, I would very much agree. To be frank, we're no big fans of the extension of ETS to road transport and buildings, but now the proposal is there, so we probably need to live with it. What we're saying is that indeed you need to make sure that the carbon pricing increase does not lock people in, a fossil fuel based lifestyle, and not giving them the possibility to switch to cleaner alternatives. And so here I would insist very much on indeed all these structural measures, such as the ones we're discussing in the framework of the Energy Efficiency Directive, RED, car CO2 targets, which will really bring the change and make the change the more sustainable alternatives available to people. And regarding the social climate fund, which is an important one, our take is that all the revenues from this ETS extension should be earmarked for consumers. So for instance, we should not have any cross-financing of consumers paying more taxes or more carbon prices, and this helping, for instance, develop hydrogen networks which won't be used for them. So all the revenues should flow back to consumers, either in the form of lump sum payment. This works in some countries which have implemented these carbon pricing measures, or in the form of help to switch to heat pumps, for instance, to renovate your homes, etc. And then maybe just one point on this accompanying structural measures. In the EED, for instance, it's not only a financial problem, right? For instance, renovating your home, it's, of course, there is the problem of upfront costs, but there are many other very practical problems. And here I would insist on one of these buzzwords that you hear in the Brussels bubble anytime you speak about the EED. It's the one-stop shops, So everyone mentions drops one-stop shop in their public speeches, etc. But it's a very important tool, because it's where consumers can turn to when they're looking to renovate their home. And one-stop shop in the EED is mentioned, but merely as an information tool. And what we're saying as consumer groups is that it needs to be much more than only information. One-stop shop should provide concrete, practical support to consumers throughout the renovation journey. Contacting accredited installers, looking at finances, also taking up the liability in case something wrong happens during the work. So that's the kind of measures which is not only financial, but which needs to be implemented if we want to make sure that higher carbon pricing does not harm people.
Thank you, Dimitri. And I would like to bring into the discussion Vida, maybe to have a bigger picture on the financing and on the amount of financing needed and on the tools. Can you tell us a bit more, coming from your IEA analysis on this topic, also maybe related to the benefits that those investments on energy efficiency can bring?
Absolutely, but first just a comment on carbon pricing, because what we saw now with the increase of the cost of natural gas, we saw that some countries started switching back to the use of coal, which of course is devastating for the climate. However, having that carbon tax created disincentives to others to do so. So something to absolutely keep in mind in terms of the investments we need for energy efficiency. So what we saw, as I was saying before, we're seeing marginal increases of action in terms of implementation. We did see an increase of investments in energy efficiency, but that comes as a backdrop to actually the worst year on energy efficiency investments in recent times. So we have investments in the scale globally of around 30 billion US dollars, and the increase was about 10%, and mostly due to government recovery spending that was directed to energy efficiency and broader economic recovery. And in terms of positive trends, the bulk of this came from Europe. In terms of perhaps less positive trends, it has been a once-off increase. So it doesn't necessarily indicate that we'll have a sustained growth. And if we go back to our net zero scenario and look at what are the levels of investments that we would need annually, we need a tripling. So we need to go from 300 billion to 900 billion or more every year over the next decade, which of course is a massive increase. And then that calls for us to look at what are all the full package of existing instruments that can be leveraged. How do we get the private sector to want to invest in energy efficiency? How do we de-risk? How do we improve return on investment? How do we incentivize? And how do we build a workforce that can deliver these types of energy services and products to match those investment levels? So again, while trends are marginally positive, we need to scale up and ramp up massively to have a chance of being able to support a clean energy transition. And as I was saying, that the benefits associated with energy efficiency are significant, but definitely more work needed in terms of quantifying them, communicating them, and reaching new audiences, and devising new and novel approaches as well. And so just as a very final point, I'd like to invite all of you, listeners and panelists, to our 7th Global Energy Efficiency Conference, which will be on 7th to 9th of June. We're organizing it together with the Danish government. So we'll have it in Sonderborg in Denmark, but also online. And we will there discuss what are the practical actions that need to be taken to ramp up progress on energy efficiency. What can we learn from governments and initiatives around the world? And how do we accelerate progress? Thank you.
Thank you, Vida. Looking forward, and I'm sure we will be there at least online to follow, as always, the very interesting conference of the IEA. We have 15 minutes left. I have a question to Niels coming from the audience, but I'm sure that many other panelists would be happy to reply to that. The question is from Canton de Hulst of the European Copper Institute. And it goes back again to building renovation and social housing. So he sees that from council reports that member states are reluctant to renovate social housing and consider that energy poverty is only part of their social policy, not energy policy. So how can we secure sufficient ambition for building renovation also in the sector? And is maybe suggesting, do we have to have specific target for the building stock? So beside the massive social benefits of renovation, we cannot achieve a successful energy transition if we continue to waste energy in inefficient buildings. So that's his question and comment. So I don't know if Niels would like to come in first, and then I'm sure many of you will have views on how to ensure that the building stock can deliver through the EED, but also the upcoming EPBD.
Okay, yes, a very good question. I think it was Louise Sunderland who said in her intervention that low-income households also often are the one who have energy inefficient houses or apartments. I can relate to that. Just after high school, I moved to London with some friends, and we were certainly not a high-income household. We worked as bartenders in London, and we lived in an apartment in South London with a horrible lack of insulation. I remember that during the winter, we could not keep the apartment warm, and we had, like, our window was actually broken, so we tried to fix it with gaffer tape. That probably did not help either, but we have this electric radiator that we turned up to the maximum, and then we could stay in one room of the apartment. But anyway, we were young and happy, so we managed. But of course, I think it's a very important question, and just completely agree that low-income households are the ones who need energy efficiency the most, because that will reduce their energy bills. But often they are the ones who have the least energy efficient homes. And so, should we have a specific target for that, for the renovations among the energy vulnerable? I think that could be something we could consider. That's probably more relevant for the the Buildings Directive, the EPBD, Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. I think that could be something we could perhaps implement there. What I'm pretty concerned about, which I haven't figured out the solution to yet, is how we make sure that it doesn't end up as a huge extra bill for the vulnerable consumers. That when you renovate their apartments, the rent might rise. We've had in Denmark, I can just speak from my own experience, we've had some companies that speculate in buying property, renovating it, and then raising the rent. And then the people who live there, they can no longer live there because the rent is too high. And how do we avoid? I think it's called renovictions. That's the term that some people use for this kind of behavior. How can we avoid that? Then we need to have some rules, specific rules avoiding that situation. But in general, I think we should consider what the person asking the question is proposing, to have specific targets for the vulnerable. Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else would like to come on this point? Yeah, Louise?
Yeah, just to contribute, I think it is very clear that keep trying to solve the energy poverty problem just through social policy. You know, it is like, I always call it, it's like trying to fill up the bathtub without putting the plug in. You know, we keep having to give more and more money each year to just keep the household at 0.0. Whereas if we address the structural issue, which structurally in the residential sector, we're talking about the buildings. If we address those buildings, then we get the long-term solution forever, and it means that, you know, it's just a much more cost-effective long-term solution. So I do agree with the questioner that, yes, I think a lot of countries do turn to social policy, but I just don't think that we can continue with that. It's just not a very financially sustainable solution. And do we need more firm measures in the building sector? I think, of course, we do. I think the questioner asks about targets. I think targets are useful, but actually they don't overcome some of the key barriers we have in the building sector. And I think that the key barriers we have in the building sector are around communication and clarity and alignment and planning, and actually going back to the points that were made around district heating and the kind of area-based planning and actually some compulsory measures. I think those are the sorts of measures that we need, and minimum energy performance standards that we do expect to see in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive will be key for that. They will be key to illustrating to each building owner what the pathway for their building is, but also to the supply chain. Incredibly important that the supply chain in the building sector has really not had the right signals to scale up. And I think, Valerie, this was your point earlier, that I think with very clear signals, the private sector can really contribute a lot, and also needs those to get to the point where actually the private sector, the commercial sector the supply chain can deliver the renovations that we're going to need at scale. I think that sort of integration, area-based planning and performance standards as part of that, just to illustrate from one example, that interaction, the Netherlands well-publicized area-based gas phase-out is now being supported by a minimum insulation standard for different building archetypes. So this is a kind of area-based strategy that's being supported by standards that provide clarity for, the minimum insulation for the buildings being connected to the new low temperature heat, which gives the building owners a clear understanding of what they need to do, the local authority clear understanding of what some of those technical requirements are. So I think, yeah, the simple answer is absolutely yes, we can't rely on social policy, and yes, we do require more firm policies in the building sector.
Thank you, Louise. So I think as we are approaching to the end of our session, and maybe I will still ask you for a final comment. Your final comment can be on something that you wanted to say during the whole debate, but you didn't manage to squeeze in. So that's your occasion, even if it's not directly related with the last questions. Please say what you are burning to say, but you didn't have the occasion to do so. And if you manage to say everything that you wanted, then just maybe reflect on a point that you have learned from another speakers and that for you is a good takeaway of this event. So is there someone who would like to start that is brave enough to take this final question? Yeah, Dimitri, please. And be short because we are 6 minutes to the end of the event. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the EED is so broad that you can't really touch on everything in 1 hour, 1 hour and a half even. What I would say is really agree very much with what Neil said about binding targets for energy efficiency obligation schemes, and I would say that it's very important to oblige energy companies, for instance, not to target only the low-hanging fruits, but also, for instance, address multi-unit buildings, which are the biggest headache in terms of housing renovation. So integrating this fully under the EED would be very, very important. And then many other things, but I'll stop here.
Thanks, Dimitri. The second, Valerie, please go ahead.
Yes, industry, energy efficiency in industry mustn't be forgotten. And one of the keys for that would be a proper incentivizing of the use of waste heat. It is already in some definition, I mean, it's already covered to some extent, but it could be even better covered. And it mustn't be forgotten because it's key for energy efficiency and it's good for competitiveness, both by the same token.
Thank you, Valerie. Short and to the point. Who wants to go next? Vida, maybe?
Yes, thank you. I'll take this opportunity to thank you all for a really interesting discussion and some very important insights and reflections. Maybe just to repeat some of the things that we've covered. The need for urgent action, the need for early action. To achieve that, we need robust policy packages that cover all policy domains. Energy efficiency is not just an energy efficiency issue. It spans across all our policies, all aspects of our lives, all sectors. It needs a systematic approach. We need to break silos and institutional boundaries. We need to get different organizations working more closely together. And beyond there are existing technologies, there are existing policies that just need to be ramped up and deployed. There's much to be learned from other countries. We also need to continue to stimulate innovation, both innovation in the policy sphere, new approaches, new, more effective policy packages, as well as technological and service innovation to really strengthen the case for energy efficiency and get to those implementation levels that are needed. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I'll pass it to Louise so that I can leave the final word to Niels.
Wow, how to follow that beautiful summary from Vida. What can one say? I suppose just reflecting once again on the Energy Efficiency Directive, just to pick up one thing that I was pleased to hear Neil say, and I'm going to say it out loud so that so that he's reminded of it, is that he mentioned firming up some more elements in the directive, and I think he also mentioned firming up a later article in the directive that suggests that member states might create a fund for energy poor households for their energy efficiency measures. And I really think this is something we really could firm up. It's something we're missing in this whole framework, I think, at European level. And one of the biggest barriers for low-income households specific to them is they don't have the funds to contribute. So we do need funding, we do need a fund, and we need funds that are ring-fenced, because of course, as we know, if they're not ring-fenced, they go to all of the other cheaper and easier solutions.
And finally, Niels.
Great, thank you very much, guys. I think it's been great discussing with you, and I have noted down a lot of stuff in my book here. So just to finish, well, maybe I will just say that something that Valerie said in her initial remark, that the industry needs market signals, and I think the EED certainly should provide some market signals, saying, putting some clear targets for the future, both in the short term, but also in the long term, so the industry knows where it should invest and in which direction it should go. I'm a social democrat, but I also have some confidence in the market. So I think that's what we need. We need to direct the market towards energy savings. And then my final remark, also referring to Valerie here, waste heat. We didn't discuss that so much, but I think that will be really important too. And I'm thinking about data centers, and maybe we could discuss that another day. But I think that data centers, we will have more and more data centers, and they will take up more and more of our energy consumption. And we need to use the heat that they're creating in an efficient way. So I think that should also be part of our effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask the public to give a virtual round of applause by writing a bravo in the chat for our panelists. Thank you very much for joining us today. I think you have done a beautiful work on summarizing the discussion now, so I don't need it to do once again as we are ending and approaching to the end of this event. I'd like just to say that as the Coalition for Energy Savings, we could not agree more with many of the points that were made today. And on our side, just a reminder, we will keep pushing on the following priorities for the EED recast. First, and as we have heard already by almost all the speakers, the recast of the EED must provide the right signals to all stakeholders and investors that many cost-effective energy savings opportunities still exist and must be grasped in all sectors. In that sense, as a coalition, we are more convinced than ever that a EU-binding energy efficiency target of at least 40%, coupled with binding national contribution, is needed to unleash the multiple benefits of energy efficiency for the climate, the citizens, and the economy. Second, a higher 2030 energy efficiency target must be underpinned by strong provisions. We have heard about many today. For us, what is also very crucial that we have in place a well-functioning energy savings obligation with a rate of at least 2%. And of course, as mentioned today, energy savings obligation should also further contribute to alleviate energy poverty by targeting the most vulnerable consumers. Beyond the energy savings obligation, we also believe that the role of the public sector in delivering energy savings is crucial. Also, for example, through the requirement for public bodies to renovate at nearly zero energy levels 3% of the buildings they own. And finally, we didn't have much time to discuss this today, maybe again for another time. We would again mention the positive role that energy savings can play in many domains. And so the new article on the energy efficiency first principle introduced in the EED recast should be reinforced with clear requirements to ensure it is correctly applied and enforced across the EU, because we really believe that the energy efficiency first principle is a key enabler for the decarbonization of the EU energy system, particularly if we want that this transformation is inclusive and affordable. With that, I would like to thank you very much again, all speakers and the audience, for staying with us this afternoon. I would also like to thank you, my colleagues, Antonin and Milena, as their work on the background made this event possible. Thank you. And also, as a last information, the recording of the event will be available on our website. Please as well, do not hesitate to get in touch with us to keep the conversation going. So thank you very much for your time and have a nice afternoon. Thank you. Bye.